All right, we're going to go ahead and get started now. It's 11 a.m., 10 a.m. for some folks joining us. Welcome to the Great Lakes ROTA-R presentation. Today's presentation is Can Intergenerational Connection Heal Us? This webinar is being hosted by the Great Lakes Rural Opioid Technical Assistance Regional Center's regional partner, Ohio State University. I'll be your host, Kelly Cabral. I am a project director with the Ohio Youth Resilience Collaborative at Ohio State. And before we get into our presentation, we're going to have just a few quick housekeeping items to address. Okay, so first let us take a moment to acknowledge our funder and funding activity. The Great Lakes ROTA-R is funded by Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration to provide training and technical assistance to the rural communities within the Great Lakes. Collaboratively, we develop and strengthen community capacity to prevent, treat, and support recovery for opioid use disorder and other mental health conditions and substance use disorders. Through cooperative extension state programs, we employ evidence-based emerging practices and provide virtual and on-demand education for rural community members regarding substance use education and other relevant topics in mental health and substance use disorders. In communities with Indigenous populations, the project co-creates culturally responsive holistic health education and resources. We also provide evidence-based resources and research, as well as technical outreach to professionals working in and with rural communities. We invite you to learn more about the Great Lakes Rural Opioid Technical Assistance Regional Center, its resources and partners by participating in our grant products. Our project is kind of in a wrap-up phase, but all of our resources that we'll be sharing on our website and recordings of this, as well as previous trainings, will be available on the website. I'll make sure I share that in the chat with everyone as we get going. As we prepare to listen and engage in the session content, let us take a moment to promote the use of affirming person-first language when discussing behavioral health disorders. As we create an environment of learning together, let us create a learning space that is welcoming and safe for everyone. As a virtual learning community, we ask that all participants support non-stigmatizing, recovery-oriented language that can help reduce negative bias and promote engagement. We invite your active participation from whatever space you are joining us today, and we welcome you formally into the Great Lakes ROTA-R virtual learning community. I am so pleased to introduce our speakers today. Janet O is a Bay Area nonprofit leader, serves as Senior Director of Innovation and Programs at CoGenerate, a national nonprofit bridging generational divides. An accomplished innovator, facilitator, and coach, Janet leads groups of social entrepreneurs through fellowship programs designed to strengthen their efforts to bring older and younger people together for social change. We also will have another speaker joining us, Kelly Saunders, and she is with co-founder of Story MKE. Kelly and a vibrant group of young people, educators, advocates, and visionaries created Story MKE as a way to build community after COVID. Kelly loves people, stories, art, and words, having learned so much from her 2 decades of high school teaching. Her creative pursuits are always grounded in the people she meets, the art she explores, and her firm belief that love is a form of justice. Welcome to both of our speakers today. I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for that introduction. And thank you so much to Kelly Saunders for joining to talk about our work. So I wanted to start with an opening question for all of you, and I'm just going to share my screen so you could see my slides. And the question is, where in your community do multiple generations already come together? So give that a thought, and then I'd love to see in the chat what comes up for you. And then if Kelly, I don't know if you're able to
Yeah,
see.
so we have a variety of things here. Church, softball fields, local school events, houses of worship, family gatherings, barber shops, faith communities, churches, grocery stores, homes, block parties.
Awesome. Thank you. I love that so many places came to mind, and I think it's helpful as we like have this conversation to think about those spaces in your community that all are already ripe for doing more intergenerational connection. But let me back up and tell you more about myself and Cogenerate. My name is Janet O, and I am the child of Korean immigrants. And I did not grow up with my grandparents or much of an extended family around me. So my first job out of college in my 20s was working with a program called Experience Corps that Cogenerate actually started many years ago, and now it's run by AARP. But it's a program that brings retirees into schools to be tutors and mentors in elementary school. So that was kind of my experience of working across generations. And I managed a team of elders that really changed my perspective on aging. I got to, on a daily basis, kind of work. Many of the staff were like young in their 20s, and then all of the volunteers were 50 and older, 50, 60, 70 and up. And we got to work in a school setting. And I can't tell you how many people I've met who kind of a similar trajectory, like the details are a little bit different, but at a young age, they had a powerful relationship with someone much older than them, and that completely kind of changed their life and their view on what it means to get older. So I just wanted to start by defining cogeneration for you, so we're on the same page.
Janet, real quick, we just had a question that wanted to ask what was the name of the organization again?
It's so my organization is called Cogenerate, and the tutoring program I was mentioning is called AARP Experience Corps. And I could put that in the chat in a moment, but it's Core CORPS. It is a national program. Um, okay, so the definition of cogeneration is kind of a word that we sort of made up slash borrowed, and it means the power that's created when older and younger people come together to solve big problems. And we took this word from the energy space, where two sources of power come together to create more power. And so that's how we think of cogeneration. So it's slightly different from intergenerational in the sense that, like, I think cogeneration is really about co-creation, sharing power, and many other things that we'll talk about. But today I wanted to give you a quick little overview of where we'll be going in our presentation and conversation. So I will tell you a little bit more about the context of cogeneration. And we did a deep dive into the topic of social isolation and loneliness. So we're going to look at that. And one of the great organizations who joined our deep dive and people is Kelly Saunders and Story MKE. So we're going to hear from Kelly and kind of do a case study and have some Q&A with Kelly. And then finally, towards the end, I'm going to ask you to think about cogeneration and how that might work in your communities. Okay, so I wanted to do like a very, very brief demographics lesson because many people are surprised when they see this. So at the turn of the last century, almost half of the US population was under 20 years old, and only about 1 in 20 was over age 60. So the age distribution was shaped like a triangle, and there were many more younger people than there were older people. And at almost every chronological age, there were fewer people than in the one before it. So it's kind of easiest if you can see the graph. Now, the population looks very different. It looks like a rectangle with almost equal number of people of every age from birth to 70 and beyond. 1 in 4 people is under 20, and similarly, 1 in 4 people is over 60. And what that means is that in our communities, we have 5 generations living and working together. That is pretty common, but actually, it's possible for 6 generations to be co living, coexisting. And yet, outside of our families, we don't get many chances to engage with people who are old enough to be our grandparents or grandchildren. America today is one of the most age diverse places than we've ever been, but despite that, we're more age segregated than ever before. Society is kind of structured in these ways that put younger people at school, put middle aged people at work, and then older people, often in retirement communities, which makes cross generational relationships outside of families really rare. Okay. And so then our belief is that because of that age segregation, many tensions kind of exist in our culture, and we see that as generational conflict. We see it as ageism, and we see it as loneliness, to name a few. And at CoGenerate, we believe that if we can bring more youngers and olders working together, we can bring stronger communities. So I wanted to just go into the deep dive that we did around social isolation and loneliness. And we published this report called Can Intergenerational Connection Heal Us? And it has 9 key findings. And we really were interested in this topic because we know that young people are experiencing unprecedented levels of loneliness. And meanwhile, older adults are becoming increasingly isolated as they age. But when we did our call, we held a community of practice that was 5 weeks with organizations looking to bring younger and older people together to address social isolation and loneliness. It turns out hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations across the country are putting the puzzle pieces of youngers and olders together to solve the epidemic of loneliness and isolation. So last fall, in our community of practice, we had 167 organizations that were a part of it. And in this deep dive, we interviewed 41 experts, as well as many of the members of the community of practice, to really think about how intergenerational relationships can help. So today, I'm not going to go through all 9, but I wanted to highlight 3, and then I wanted to invite Kelly Saunders to talk about Story MKE to help bring it to life. So here are the 9, and I'll give you a second to just kind of skim that. And then here are the 3 that I want to talk about. So the first is that age gap friendships, so meaning friendships between people where there is a large age gap, are in and they work. So people, especially younger generations, are really hungry for meaningful mutual relationships across age lines. If we did a review in the media, and there are countless stories of like, she's 70, he's 20, they had this accidental meeting and now they have Thanksgiving dinner together every year. Those types of things, like the stories keep coming. And there's definitely a desire, especially from younger people, to have these connections. These friendships are reshaping how we think about belonging and purpose and leadership. And the age gap friendships work because they help younger people see the long view and remind older adults that they're still part of what's next. So the mutual recognition across time is powerful, especially we see it in, for example, college settings designed to help students form their identity and shape their future. Okay. A big one, which is why I'm so excited to have Kelly Saunders join us, is we saw this theme around creativity, that creativity really speeds connection. So if you were looking for a hack, that might be it. So when people create something together, whether it's through dance or music or art or theater or writing or cooking, that these shared creative experiences allow people to drop their guard, build trust, and find common ground without feeling forced, without feeling artificial. And that's not because one generation is helping or serving the other, but it's because there is this kind of level playing field where they get to collaborate and contribute to creating something together. The next big finding I wanted to highlight today is around trust. And this one seems obvious to me, but I really feel like it's the how that is so critical and is the part that is so community specific. But that intergenerational relationships require trust, and building trust takes time. So the practitioners we worked with found that um, things like ongoing opportunities to connect were better than one-off events. And another tip that emerged was that facilitators can often set the tone by modeling vulnerability and sharing something personal. But it's important, of course, to move at the speed of trust, that inviting people to share as little or as much as feels right to them is also very important. So those were kind of the three main findings I wanted to share. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I wanted to invite Kelly Saunders to join us. Um, and Kelly, maybe you could start first by just telling everyone about Story MKE so they understand the context of your work.
Sure. Yep. And thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. And I'll say I'm coming from Milwaukee, where we have a lot of cleanout going on because of the flooding this weekend, and that instantaneous community that comes together to help. And so when you're talking about that, not having it be a one-off, I've been thinking a lot about that today. Um, so I was a high school teacher for about 20 years and was transitioning out of teaching after the pandemic. So in 2021, I came together with some people to talk about what it was going to look like to have our young people come back to school. And when they did, all of us having gone through this, this generational struggle together, I myself was very surprised at the work that was needed for the young people to be able to be in spaces together and not just be going through the motions of school. And so I was able to write a grant with some interested people to have what really was a book club, and to have, and it started right away when the school year started in September of 2021, to try and create a space for young people to have a way to talk and be together outside of getting back into the routines of school, but also to help them kind of find their rhythm with the what next. So it looks so different now, but in the beginning it was going to be, that we would have youth thinking about how they wanted to drive community conversations based on the books. They were able to choose any book they wanted to read, which was a new thing, but also we had a lot available in terms of the books that we would purchase for them. So we would come together at a school and talk. And very quickly then it moved into talking to authors of the books and getting other people involved that were not actually at the school. And so from my experience, the intergenerational part came quickly because of the kids that had come into the room. So
Yeah. Kelly, maybe you could say a little bit more about that, because what I love about your work is that it really started with this very specific youth focused and then became sort of accidentally intergenerational, which I feel like I hear from a lot of programs. So would love for you to just talk about how it became accidentally intergenerational.
Yes. So the kids would come into the room and get their books and talk about them. And then when we talked about how we were going to be having one of our author visits, and at the time it was virtual, with an author in New York named Mahogany Brown, the kids asked if they could have an extra book for their mom or their auntie or my neighbor or my pastor, and we said yes. And when I say we, I mean me and the teacher who was a facilitator with me at the time. And so when we were reading, and the book was about first love, we would often hear the stories of the people outside of the book club, but in their lives that were also then reading with us. And then coming into the Zoom, because everybody wanted to talk to the author. So it wasn't just the young people. And so what I saw happen was that the conversation became much more organic and fluid and deep, because it wasn't just that we were sitting in a classroom after school talking about books, but we were actually with other people, other lived experiences, other people from their lives that were having the experience with us. And so there was always the intention for the young people to be able to kind of lead things in the direction that they wanted it to go. But from there, it just took off, because then we were able to tap into this very rich network of people that then we could, that helped guide our programming in the second, third, fourth year. So.
And I'd love to ask, this is a question we haven't talked about in the past, so I might be throwing you a curveball, but I'm curious because I think sometimes when people hear about these programs, it sounds like they're more formal than they actually were. And I was just curious about like the grant funding, if you could give people a sense of like how much grant funding you had at the beginning to start this project.
Sure. So the Wisconsin Humanities Council put out a call for people who wanted to do something with social isolation and loneliness post-pandemic. And so we were able to write for this funding, and we received $10,000. And we worked with the kids on how we were going to budget that. A lot of it in the beginning went toward books, and a lot of it was about transportation. But it was tiny, but there were a lot of people involved in the beginning. And the focus was on kind of moving out of a scarcity mindset into abundance after what we had all gone through. So I always tell the story of when we would bring in the books that they said that they wanted to read, and we have these stacks of them. And kids will say, well, which one can I take? And we'd say, you can take all of them, and as many as you need, and shifting that ethos to say, we're going to do this together, and we're going to figure out a way to do it, so that then when we did have other interested people involved who weren't a part of it, we had for them as well. So
yeah, thank you.
It was tiny, and it was a guiding coalition of volunteers and in that word, but that really wanted to see what we could make of it. So.
And I'm curious how, so you kind of like started this youth-centered reading group, book club, that the kids then asked for it to be intergenerational. And then it sounds like you discovered like the beauty of that, the magic of it, of having like different life perspectives in the room when you talk about things like first love. So I'm just curious how you've leaned in and become more intentional about the intergenerational parts of your program.
Sure. So I believe very strongly, both from my background as a teacher, but then also in the work that I do with young people, that they have to have a seat at the table from the beginning, because otherwise there isn't a notion that this is for them, but it's being done to them. And so we wanted to make sure that we were working together, and by we I mean me and the young people, to figure out what next all the time. And so it shifted a little from, okay, we're going to come together and talk about books. That was, the beginning iteration, to having dedicated time in that space to talking about the what next. And so really what happened quickly was the idea that it wasn't supposed to be taking place in that classroom, that it was supposed to be taking place in other spaces in the community. young people are acutely aware in the same way that I see that olders are, that there are some spaces that are much more readily available to them, either in a sense of welcoming or a sense of accessibility. And so when we started moving into those spaces, it was really important for the kids to guide it with the people that they were bringing in so that we were able to be responsive to it being radically welcoming the whole time. So we had gone to some different, like we went to theater, we went to a printing shop, we went to an art museum, but what they wanted was to be in spaces near their community center where people could come and be able to get in because of like accessibility or a ride, and then plan from there about the what next. So I don't know if that answers the question. I mean, I can talk about specific projects too, but I didn't know if there was another frame that you wanted me to.
Yeah, no, I think that's what's interesting is with the work that Cogenerate does, like we have a belief that young people are actually leading this intergenerational movement. So what you were saying about like it's not being done, these programs aren't being done for them or at them, really with them, and that they were kind of asking for that piece that was like inclusive of many people in their lives and kind of rooted in their own community, as opposed to like an intervention that you came with. So I'm curious if you could talk about some of the things that were hard for adults as they were a part of this process, like what the challenges were that came up.
Sure. So the young people that I work with are big dreamers, and I love that. And so when we were broadening the space to having different conversations in community, one of the first things that I learned, and then the kids reiterated, is that you don't come into a space where you're doing co-design, or what in the education world they call design justice, where it's everybody coming in to listen and then build together. You don't come in with a solution. You shouldn't have answers before you walk in the room. And then the other piece is that it takes time to get from dreams to something that you would like to try, and you have to hold creative space open for a long time. And I think that that was a hard sell for people who wanted to see kind of the deliverable or the outcome of it in the beginning, but it was exactly what everybody really needed to build that trust and to really have it be the give and take of co-designing together, and also potentially having to shift to add more people to that conversation. So I could talk about one of the projects that kind of sparked from that after we had been doing this for a while. Some of the younger said, "Oh, we want to do something with fashion." And I said, great. I have absolutely no idea of how to connect you with resources for us to start that conversation, because that's just not a part of my expertise. I would wear the same thing every day. But and so they said, well, that's okay, because we have some people, and they were able to find some people that they knew because they sewed clothes for them when they were going to an event, or they knew worked at a particular shop. And then from there, I was able to meet a woman who had moved to Milwaukee and started a fashion school in retirement, and asked if we could have some conversations about what it would look like to bring this merging of literature, the stories that they still wanted to read, and then the expression being through fashion. And so met Lynn and Teresa and some of the people that wanted to hear what the kids wanted, and then moved from there into creating a 8-week curriculum or I shouldn't say curriculum, an 8-week experience where kids could come together and learn, but also make with some of the elders from the community, and then also having that network provided by Lynn and by Odessa House of Fashion to also like put on a fashion show with everybody, to learn a little bit about the jewelry making aspect, actually create some of the things that they wanted to wear together with the expertise of some of the other people in the room. And it was beautiful. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have more questions. I could keep at, we've had so many conversations in the past where I'm like, I could just keep asking you questions and questions, but I wanted to pause to see if other people had questions about any of what we've talked about so far. So just wanted to take a little pause to ask that for participants in the audience. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat, or if you want to just come off mute and ask.
I am. My name is Sheila. I am just curious to know a little bit more about like how the young people were asking to involve. So they must have been, I'm assuming, going to their, in their other environments, talking about this book reading project that they're a part of, and they must have been sharing something about the book. Is that how it ended up becoming, just by this organic kind of just conversations happening?
So thank you for the question, Sheila. It really was about talking with people about what they were doing in their communities at home, family networks, church, youth groups, and then also at work, the jobs that they had, where they would be talking about, oh, we're doing this, we're going to Madison for the day because we're going to be doing, this kind of thing with an art exhibit, or we're going down to the Third Ward because we're going to be seeing this fashion school, or we're going to be in the Zoom talking to this author, and here's the book. And so and that's such a good question too, because in the beginning it really was that lean into the network that you have. One of the things that I've talked with Janet and the community of practice about is that it isn't just, there is this trust in the community that they have, but that broadening out into a larger network that can be sustained. So yes, it started with the people in their own lives talking about what they were doing, or holding, the stack of 12 books, and then talking about working with the author. And then from the community engaging in some of those, we actually moved into spaces where we could participate with them. So like I said, like lit fashion, where we were actually there, we would have a meeting there, but then we would also have a jewelry making session there. So, and how it is that we continue to build that bridging and linking so that kids could continue with those relationships outside of the programs or the planning, and so they could continue to be engaging with spaces really that they that were unknown to them, or that they were reinventing, if that makes sense. So I like to tell the story of us going, Erica Sanchez is an author that the girls wanted to read, and we went to the bookstore when she was speaking. And so we went to an area that for almost all the young people, it was the first time that they had been to this bookstore. We had some people coming from a local university, both faculty and older students. And then we had family members that decided to come along as well. And the bookstore owner, got to know the kids and the program, but also then got to know the other people. We ended up having pizza next door with some of the people that had come, and then it became a space where the kids could go and talk to Daniel without any Story Milwaukee part of it. And it didn't happen all the time, but then they knew that that space was available to them. And also, the people that came offered other spaces that I didn't know about that were eager to do some sort of programming like that. So
that kind of answers my follow-up question then too.
Okay. What sustain? You know, some parts do and some parts don't. And what some of the kids say to me is, well, that's just, it was time for it to be done. But some have continued building. So I mentioned the bookstore. We ended up with with the local university building out a program where we had the youth from Story Milwaukee going and doing a project at the university, and they have an intergenerational living facility there now. And so thinking about the possibilities there. And so a couple of the kids who now attend the university continue to do things where they're bringing different groups across campus together for a storytelling initiative, for a poetry book. We were able to get a story booth put in a space where anybody can come, and then they spark projects to keep a digital archive going of the story. It's called In the Words of Women. So yeah, but some stuff falls away, right? And funding has been difficult, we all know. And so it has definitely become their project to keep going, with me being one of the big champions of it. So, but I appreciate the question.
I saw Pam's comment, and she said, my mind is spinning here. Our parks and rec programs are all age siloed programs. So I was curious, Kelly, and then I'll turn the question onto myself. But if you had any advice for people if they're interested, like maybe like this example that Pam gave of like all the programs are age siloed. I've seen that where I live too. Any advice on how people might start an intergenerational program?
Well, I think my first step would be talking with a wide variety of people who have an idea. I love that nod to that programs are offered in age silos, because that's true. So then maybe sparking the idea to offer one that isn't. I think my advice is to always empower all the voices and not have it be that there's an intention, which we know there's a pressure in grant funding, right? That you need to meet objectives, but those objectives now are written together and hold true to what it is that we want to see designed. And I feel like as I speak here today about this, that it does seem amorphous, because it is, it changes from cooking to fashion to reading to zines or whatever, because it's built together and it grows in different spaces or shrinks in different spaces because of what it is that people are looking for. So my two big takeaways would be, that you do it all together, even all the troubleshooting that happens along the way, and that you stay flexible within a particular structure to see the magic happen. Because if you have the idea for a program and what you want it to be before you engage all the different older and younger voices, then that program is for you. It's not for everybody. And so, but it is also hard to do sometimes, because it takes time and people that will consistently engage, and the ability to pivot when you need to. So
thank you. So we're gonna keep questions coming for Kelly as they come up for you. But I think this prompt by Pam, I do want to share like a framework that we use as people think about creating intergenerational programs. And I'll say, like, I admire Kelly so much because she really approached the work as an artist who was very dedicated to the process versus the product. So she didn't come in with this like grant um, funded mindset of like, here is our program model and this is our service delivery and here are our outputs and our outcome, because you could easily see how then like the books are for the youth, and then going beyond that might not have been a possibility with a more narrow mindset. And I'll just say, but, but not every program is like that. Sometimes they are designed in a very specific model, and the intergenerational piece is not so amorphous and free flowing, and I think still benefits from all of that co-design process and involving other inputs and voices, but might be a little bit more linear. And one came to mind that I was just thinking about. So I learned that the Brooklyn Public Library, they have an intergenerational debate team. And I was so curious because I'd never seen this before, of like how that came to be. And how it came to be is that the person working in the senior services department of the library kind of had this, I wouldn't say mandate, but this like from above um, direction to start an intergenerational debate team. So it was within senior services, which I thought was super interesting. So they recruited the elders from their program work, and then worked really hard to find teens, younger people who were interested in debate, and then created a program, a multi-week program that was, it looks very much like the debate world, which I don't know that much about, but where there's like topics, there's a session, they have judges come in and like give feedback on the arguments and those types of things. So I see your question, Sheila. I'm going to come back to it. I wanted to share this one slide to kind of help everyone think about, like, if you're curious about how to foster more intergenerational connections in your community, we often think about like the 3 Ps, and they are proximity, purpose, and partnership. So proximity is just the idea of like that opening question I had of like, where do you already see multiple generations coming together? And perhaps that is a ripe spot or a guidance, a compass, kind of giving you direction on where you might naturally start an intergenerational program or experiment or something in your community. The purpose part is really around, sometimes it's common purpose, but sometimes it's not a shared purpose. Like when I heard Kelly speaking, like I heard some of the purpose for the younger students, the students involved in the work, was like maybe to like be engaged. Maybe it was just like, I want to do something fun that matches my interest outside of school. So it was that like interest of maybe being with friends. Maybe it was like exploring like fashion or books that speak to me. And then perhaps the older people, and I'm just hypothesizing, but it could have been the same interest, or it could have been like a younger person is asking me to like come share my like sewing skills, or book skills or something, and so that invitation was the purpose. And then I think the partnership is the part that Kelly was speaking to a lot, was about like, how do you create a space where youngers and olders are invited to like give their input, and maybe at times it's the older people stepping back and letting the younger people lead, but maybe not always. Maybe like in terms of like the location, like Kelly, I know you've talked about this, the location of where something's held, it's really based on accessibility, perhaps for the older people, and what is like a ground level place where people can come together so that someone's grandma could participate, for example. So I think this is my question to all of you, in in the audience is like, I'm so curious, like what you might already be doing that's intergenerational, and maybe you haven't, maybe it's accidental and you have some ideas sparked on like how you could lean into that more and actually design for the intergenerational piece. Or if not, are there certain little experiments that you might want to try in the work that you do to expand the ages involved in the community that you're interacting with? So would love to just hear like what's coming up for people, what ideas are coming to mind.
There's a comment in the chat that says, I wonder about how AI will impact our life and society. We will get the answers. Where are the relationships built? We are social beings. Twice last week, I heard about AI relationships. I think I saw something about AI someone like marrying their bot or something like that as well. So yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah, there is an organization called Foundation for Social Connection, who is really a leader in social isolation and loneliness. And they just released a report last week that's about intergenerational conversations about AI. And they talked with young people, they talked with their parents, adults, teachers, coaches, all of those types of people to think about AI. And they produced this really interesting report that I can put in the chat in a moment.
I'm also thinking about something that I do for my, like reflection for myself, but do sometimes with the olders, which is what is the intention of being a part of something? So the intention of being a part of Story Milwaukee was really so we could be together. What is the intention of the people who joined? I like that you said, Janet, you know, maybe it had to do the younger people out of interest, but if my intention was something other than really building community or feeling less isolated or lonely, then there was something that I had to figure out about what I was doing. And with the olders, there was often this, you know, wanting to share knowledge, wanting to mentor, that kind of thing, but really starting with the purpose of why we were coming together, and thinking too, we do a short reflection at the beginning about who walks behind us and who walks beside us in this work, and I'm thinking about that for that particular moment in time and the intention of along with the intention of what we're doing. So I think that young people being involved in talking about AI is so important because of the different parts of their life that are they approach it differently than I ever will because it's new for me. And that shared learning that can go on when we start thinking about why we're using it and what we want it for is important.
Kelly, can you talk a little bit about how the olders have reflected back about their experience and what they say they kind of get out of it?
Sure. I think, you know, there have been people are really excited sometimes, olders, to be able to be in a space with young people, particularly high school students, that will be creating with them or talking with them, and needing to have it be an organic conversation rather than trying to teach them about something based on their own experience, but really enjoying the creativity and the openness and the questions that youngers bring into that space. But then also, I have seen across the board, the olders that get involved really want it to be consistent and not a one-off, but also think about ways that they can continue to connect beyond just the initial series of engagements. So, you know, oh, I've got, you know, we've built something together. I want you to keep doing this, or, you know, I want us to keep doing this together, or I want to be able to connect you to people that can keep doing it in some other way. So that's been really wonderful to see the energy that comes. And I see that energy too from the young people. So
Yeah, I think we did a study, it was a national survey, asking people about their desire to be a part of intergenerational relationships. And across the board, every generation responded very positively that they wanted that. But the generation that wanted it the most was the youngest generation, was Gen Z. And then, but also people said they just didn't have the opportunity for that outside of their family. So it just made me feel like it was a call to action to people like us to create more opportunities for connection. And so I see like in the chat that there's ideas popping up around 4-H clubs, master gardeners. And what I wanted to kind of like come back to was this idea, Kelly, that you were saying, like, it wasn't necessarily older people teaching something, although there are opportunities for that, especially if you have great expertise. But I've been thinking a lot about like how to not be a mentor. And I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit about that and how you kind of design around that concept, or even what that means uh, in your work.
I think making sure that everybody's a part of the conversation from the beginning has been very helpful for that. And I apologize, there's some water mitigation going on in the background, so you'll hear a buzzing. But I also was thinking of, because I saw somebody in the chat was talking about the pen pal group, right? And I mean, we've had things that we thought were going to be something and they turned into something else or weren't as amazing as we initially proposed. But that when we are thinking about the barriers that need to be removed for something to happen, that everybody is in the room and we're taking account of all the different ideas. So it's not just the adults who have more access doing the troubleshooting or removing the barriers that and so working with the adults to slow down a little bit perhaps more than anything, like I said, holding that creative space open to get to solutions together has been important. I also think it goes back to what I said about intention. What is the intention of somebody getting involved? And for the olders that did in the very beginning that made it so beautiful was that they also were seeking connection and good stories and being able to chat a little bit about your first love, and not just siloing that to the young people who happen to be in a classroom. So
Yeah, I feel like I've heard from older people in our work that sometimes sometimes they feel this pressure that they're supposed to come in as the person who knows, or the person who could impart wisdom. And I think changing that dynamic, or maybe like removing that expectation, kind of allows for people to relax. And I think sometimes when that like kind of classic mentor mentee dynamic is set up, it can also stop a relationship short, because it is sort of in this prescribed or one directional kind of way. I'm curious if anyone, kind of as we wrap up here, anyone wants to come off mute to share like an idea you're thinking about, or if you tried something and it didn't work and you want to kind of get some group wisdom on it to help you troubleshoot. Anyone want to come off mute and kind of share a little bit more so we can make this practical?
This is Pam. I'm happy to come off mute. I think I really see the benefit, and I really respect the listening that both of you have described as such an important component of this model, because I notice as a grandparent, it is like a free fall through space. You know, these ideas, you think this is the way to do it, and it's not. There's 42 different other avenues, and all can end up in that point, and many of them might have merit better than the direction I was headed. So I think it does take some kind of listening, but I've felt that discomfort with silos for a long time, and there's a generation between Kelly and I, and we have worked together for the last 3 years. So I've had a sidebar comment saying, "This is us, Kelly." So I just, I think I'm gonna offer something in my park and rec. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like maybe as you offer something and you've gotten this insight that listening is an important thing. Like I feel like we could all benefit from like practicing listening skills, especially when it's in relationships where maybe as adults we're expected to know and like children are expected to learn, and so there's some role reversals that could be helpful in just practicing like what does it feel like, what is required to be in a new type of relationship. Anyone else have a comment or a thought? Okay, well, I would love to just kind of thank everyone for showing up. I think I'll turn it back to you, Kelly Cabral, but especially Kelly Saunders. I know that like life is throwing you so much right now, so really appreciate you coming, and also appreciate everyone for showing up for this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great.
Yes, thank you both. I really enjoyed the conversation as well. So that was, really, I feel like that's really helpful as we're working through these because these are kind of dynamic situations, right? Everyone's in different communities and the dynamics in communities are different. And so it's helpful to kind of have practical information about what that looks like or what that can look like. I'm going to go ahead and share with you all just some brief information that's kind of a bit of follow-up here. Oops. Let me go back. I've got a wild mouse. So I did put into the chat, and I'll drop a couple more things in. The information that we shared today will be on our ROTA website, and there is tons and tons of information available on that website in our resources page. So I'll make sure you check that out here. I'll actually advance. I'm skipping ahead on us here. So our website there, and then like I said, we have a lot of past events that have been recorded, and we have toolkits that we've developed that kind of go along with each of those different topics. And the range of topics is pretty broad. So I think it's something that anyone can drop in and find something that's useful. So please do connect with us. As I mentioned, our grant is wrapping up. But all of those resources will still remain available. And then just what to expect next. So I will drop into the chat our feedback survey. It would be really helpful for folks to complete that just so that we can share that back with our funder. And then, as I mentioned, it usually takes us about a week to 2 weeks to get all of the materials up. So the PowerPoint we'll have and the recording, and then the toolkit that will have some resources, and we'll make sure, Janet and Kelly, if you have resources that you think would be important for us to share out with the audience, aside from any that were shared today, we'll make sure we include those. We try to include resources that are both relevant nationally, but also by each state in the region. And then once all of the content is available to share, we will send out certificates of attendance to participants who were registered for today. So with that, I will go ahead and Let me stop sharing and I will get you the link for the feedback survey. Sorry, I usually have some admin support here, but we are just doing it on our own today. So here's the link for the survey. So we would appreciate if you have a second. Doesn't take too long to complete that. And I see that Janet has shared her email and then the report on social isolation and loneliness. So thank you for sharing that. Any last questions from the group before we kind of wrap up today? All right. Well, we'll be here. Hi. Yeah.
I am so sorry. I had some issues with my webcam, but I was going to just add that we had a great deal of success with intergenerational, particularly with the seniors' interest in joining us for our summer meals program. We did different themed weeks. So the one week we planted herbs, and then we had them come in and master gardeners come in and talk to the kids and help the kids plant them in the garden. And then we had another group of seniors that that tend to monarchs and butterfly gardens, and they came in and gave each of the kids a chrysalis to put on the back of their plant, and then we got to watch that. And it was just extremely meaningful to have 16 seniors partnering with 80 some kids. We had them sitting at tables of 10, so at least each table had at least one senior. And it just was one of my favorite moments in my professional career. It was really great. But I enjoyed this very much. Thank you so much.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I've been involved in it was an intergenerational grant project in the community where I live now. It was before I lived here, but it was with a local restaurant that also was doing like a little urban farm. And they were set up through the city to do like youth employment during the summer through a certain program that the city had. And then the grant project was integrating wisdom and like workshops basically from elders in the community to come in with the youth. And I feel like, food and gardening, like those are such natural spaces for connection for people of all ages. We all have memories connected to food that, it really brings that alive. So I feel like that's just such a natural space for having some of those connections. And, I'd be curious to see what happened after that grant. But you can easily see some of those things living on just in those spaces. So yeah, thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
I wanted to just point out like one last thing that I've been noticing in our conversation is that like there are not actually that many intergenerational funders out there. So what I think is interesting is that many of you have been very creative in how you do it. Like maybe it's a grant funded for young people or it's a grant funded for seniors, but you've flexed the program model to make it more inclusive. And I think while there aren't a lot of sources of intergenerational funding, when you have intergenerational programs, sometimes it actually can open doors. Like if you're a youth program and you're involving seniors now, it opens the door to like senior earmarked funding. So just wanted to kind of highlight that piece of it too, because I know that it is a really hard funding time.
We have to get creative, right? Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for attending. We'll hang out if anybody wants to chat for a few more minutes, but have a wonderful day. Keep on connecting.